Lucy Alexander had been carrying people for so long she had forgotten what it felt like to stand upright without the weight of someone else on her shoulders. She was 34 years old and she ran a company worth $3 billion, and she had not taken a holiday in 4 years. Not because the company could not run without her. Could. She had built the systems herself and hired the right people and structured everything with the deliberate precision of someone who understood that real power was the kind that functioned in your absence. She had not taken a holiday because if she stopped moving she would have to sit with the particular loneliness of a woman who had everything the world considered success and almost none of the things that actually mattered. She sat at the head of the boardroom table on a Thursday morning and walked her team through the final details of the Meridian merger. 11 people around the table. All of them excellent. None of them, in this moment, fully present the way she needed them to be. Because the Meridian merger was complicated in a way that required total attention, and 2 of her directors were exchanging the slight eye movements of people managing a side conversation without speaking. She finished the walkthrough. She answered 4 questions. She dismissed the room. She was alone at the head of the table when it happened. It started as a pressure behind her right eye. She had felt this before. The kind of headache that arrives with the specific force of something that has been building for longer than you noticed. She pressed 2 fingers against her temple and breathed and waited for it to resolve the way it usually did. It did not resolve. The room tilted. Not dramatically. Just enough. The way a picture shifts on a wall when a door slams nearby. A slight wrongness in the angle of everything. She grabbed the table edge. She sat there for 40 seconds until the tilting stopped and the pressure behind her eye reduced to a dull persistent weight that she catalogued as something to address later, and then stood and went to her next meeting because the Meridian merger did not accommodate later. She addressed it 5 days after that first episode when the 3rd episode happened in the car on the way to a site visit and her driver, a steady man named Fun who had been with her for 6 years, looked in the rear-view mirror and said quietly that she should see a doctor and that he would not be driving her to the site visit until she agreed. She agreed because Fun was one of the few people in her life who said things he meant and meant things he said. The doctor was a neurologist named Dr. Saranya Mehta. Precise. The kind of doctor who delivered information directly because she respected the intelligence of the people she was treating. Dr. Mehta showed her the scans. She explained what she was seeing and what it meant and what the likely progression looked like based on the available evidence. She used clear language, and she did not cushion it more than necessary because she understood that Lucy Alexander was a woman who needed accurate data more than she needed comfort. Months, Dr. Metis said. Possibly less depending on the rate of progression. There are experimental treatments. I want to refer you to a specialist in Geneva. Lucy sat in the consulting chair and looked at the scans on the screen and processed the information with the systematic efficiency she brought to everything. She thought about her 2 daughters. Ivy, 9 years old. 06. Their faces in the morning when they came into her room before school, still warm from sleep, still fully themselves in the unguarded way that children are fully themselves before the world starts requiring performance from them. She thought about her sister Amelia who called every Sunday and had called every Sunday for 12 years because Sunday was when Lucy was most likely to answer and Lucy had been answering because she loved her sister. And because the Sunday calls were one of the few consistent personal things in a week that was otherwise entirely professional. She thought about Charlotte, her best friend of 16 years, who had been beside her through the building of the company and the end of her marriage, and the nights when Ivy and Rose were small and she was managing motherhood and empire building simultaneously on 4 hours of sleep. She thought about George, her lawyer. The one person in her professional world who had never once given her advice that benefited him more than it benefited her. She looked at the scans. I need a few days before the Geneva referral, she said. I need to arrange some things. Dr. Mehta looked at her. Course, she said. But please do not take longer than necessary, Lucy. Lucy drove home. She sat in the back of the car while Fun navigated the city and she looked out the window and she thought very carefully about what she knew about the people closest to her. And what she needed to understand before she handed them anything. She had a feeling. She had learned to trust her feelings the way she trusted her instincts in the boardroom. Not as emotions that needed to be indulged, but as data that needed to be investigated. She called George that evening. I need to die, she said. Not permanently. But I need everyone to believe it. Can you help me? A silence on the line. George had been her lawyer for 9 years. He had developed in that time the capacity to sit with unexpected information without filling the silence prematurely. "Tell me what you need," he said. He told him. While she was planning the details with George, Lucy began to pay a different kind of attention. Not the attention she usually gave to the people around her, the warm, slightly distracted attention of a woman managing too many things simultaneously and trusting the people she loved to be who she believed they were. A sharper attention. The kind she brought to a company she was considering acquiring, where the surface presentation was interesting but what mattered was the underlying structure. She started with the company. Alexander Holdings had been losing data for 6 months. Not dramatically. Not in the way that triggered immediate security alerts. In the slow, specific way of someone who knew the systems well enough to extract information without triggering the visible thresholds. Internal meeting notes. Unreleased product schedules. The kind of information that, in the right competitor's hands, could shift market position significantly. Lucy had suspected a sophisticated external attack. She had brought in a cybersecurity firm 3 months earlier and they had found evidence of breach but not the source. She pulled the access logs herself one evening and she looked at them with the patient thoroughness of someone who was now looking at everything differently. The access patterns pointed consistently toward a set of internal credentials. Credentials that belonged to someone with legitimate high-level access. Someone who had been trusted with the system architecture because she had been beside Lucy when the systems were built. Charlotte. Lucy sat with this information for a long time. She thought about 16 years. About the nights with the small children and 4 hours of sleep. About Charlotte sitting across from her at the kitchen table at 2 in the morning saying, "You can do this. You are building something real." About what it meant for all of that to have been operating alongside something else entirely. She did not confront Charlotte. She documented everything. Quietly. Thoroughly. Then she listened. She had developed over the years of building a company from nothing a specific skill for reading rooms without appearing to read them. She had learned that the most revealing conversations happened in the spaces people believed were private, and that the best way to access those spaces was to be someone people did not feel they needed to perform for. She came home early from a site visit on a Friday, and she heard them in the kitchen before she reached the door. Amelia's voice. "The Geneva thing is going to take forever. I told Marcus we might have to postpone the Paris trip because everything is up in the air." Charlotte's voice, lower, with a specific flatness of someone saying something they have thought before and have stopped finding remarkable. "If it goes quickly, it actually simplifies everything considerably." Was. Amelia. "The girls are going to be devastated." Charlotte. "Children are resilient. They'll adjust." Lucy stood in the hallway outside her own kitchen and listened to her sister and her best friend discuss the possible convenience of her death with the tone of two people managing a scheduling inconvenience. She went upstairs. She sat on the edge of her bed. She thought about the Paris trip. About if it goes quickly. About simplifies everything considerably. She called George. "Move faster," she said. "I need this done by the end of the month." The accident happened on a bridge. A high-speed collision with a barrier. The car went over. The river below was fast and deep, and the search and rescue team worked for 36 hours before suspending active recovery. They found the vehicle largely destroyed. They found Lucy's signature watch on the riverbank. They did not find a body, which the rescue coordinator explained was not unusual in this particular river at this particular flow rate. Lucy watched the news coverage from a secure location George had arranged. A rented property outside the city, equipped with a kind of digital infrastructure that allowed her to monitor everything she needed to monitor without being detectable. She watched the coverage and she noted the responses of the people in her life with the careful attention of a woman who has decided that what she is about to see is information she needed, and that needing it does not make it less painful to receive. George called her on the second day. "The will has been read," he said. "Everything is held in trust pending a 3-month administration period. Your specific instructions have been followed exactly." "How did Amelia respond?" Lucy asked. She asked 3 times if there was any mechanism for early access, George said. "Each time I explained the trust structure." Each time she asked again. "And Charlotte?" Charlotte asked who controlled the trust during the administration period. She asked if she could contest the board appointment. Lucy looked at the wall of the rented property. Outside the window, the garden was ordinary and green, and entirely indifferent to the information being assembled inside. "Thank you, George," she said. "Keep monitoring." She hung up. She looked at her hands. She thought about $3 billion and the 16 years it had taken to build it, and the people she had believed were beside her while she was building it. She thought about Ivy and Rose. She opened the hidden camera feed from the house. Amelia moved into the master suite on the third day. Lucy watched this through the camera feed with the focused stillness of someone watching something they expected and still find difficult to witness. She watched her sister walk through the bedroom that had been Lucy's, opening drawers, assessing contents, moving things with the proprietary confidence of a woman who has decided that a space belongs to her now. She watched the wardrobe. Amelia called 2 of the house staff in on the 4th day. Lucy could not hear the conversation, but she could see the instruction in her sister's gestures. The staff brought out bags. They began filling the bags with Lucy's clothes, not packing them carefully, filling them with the careless efficiency of people removing things that no longer mattered. Lucy's clothes went into black bags. The bags were carried to the service entrance. On the 5th day, she watched Ivy and Rose being moved from their rooms. Their rooms were on the 2nd floor. Large, with a specific warmth of spaces decorated by a mother who had thought carefully about what children needed in the places they slept and read and spent the private hours of childhood. Amelia moved them to 2 rooms on the 3rd floor. Small rooms. Staff rooms. Functional and cold, and about a quarter of the size of the rooms they had come from. Lucy watched Ivy carry her own things in a cardboard box. The 9-year-old moved with the careful dignity of a child who was trying not to cry in front of adults who had already demonstrated they would not respond helpfully to her crying. Rose walked behind her holding a stuffed rabbit that had been with her since she was 18 months old. Lucy pressed her hand flat against the desk in front of the monitor and breathed. She watched Amelia tell the girls something. She could not hear it, but she saw Rose's face. 6 years old, the face of a child receiving information she could not process, and then the specific crumpling that happens when a child's face loses its composure entirely. Ivy put her arm around her sister. 9 years old, putting her arm around her 6-year-old sister in a staff room in their own house with their things in a cardboard box. Lucy looked at this. She looked at it for a long time. Then she opened a new document on her laptop, and she began writing with the focused precision of a woman who has moved from grief into something considerably more operational. She wrote for 4 hours. When she was finished, she called George. "Accelerate the timeline," she said. Her voice was completely even. "I want everything in place within 3 weeks. Lucy." 3 weeks, George. Are you all right?" "Yes." She thought about Ivy's arm around Rose's shoulders. "I will be," she said. In 3 weeks. George found the evidence on a Saturday morning. He had been working through the financial records of Alexander Holdings with the methodical patience of a lawyer, who understood that the most significant things were usually hidden in the least dramatic places. Not in dramatic transactions. In patterns. In the small, consistent irregularities that accumulated over time into something unmistakable. He found Charlotte's fingerprints across 18 months of company data. Not just the access logs Lucy had already identified. The financial structure underneath. Charlotte had been not only leaking internal information to a competitor, but had been constructing a parallel financial position that would allow her to step into the CEO role of Alexander Holdings with a pre-existing relationship with the company's primary competitor. She had been building a mechanism by which the company's collapse would benefit her directly. This was not jealousy. This was architecture. George documented everything. He was thorough. He cross-referenced. He built the case with the care of someone who understood that this evidence needed to be airtight before it could be used. He called Lucy on a Sunday morning to tell her he was ready to meet. He did not arrive at the meeting. Lucy waited for 90 minutes in the location they had arranged. She tried his phone 7 times. She sent 3 messages. Nothing. She called his office. His assistant answered and said George had left for a meeting earlier that morning and had not been in contact since. She found out what had happened through a news report. An accident. His car. A collision on the road between his home and the meeting location. The investigation was ongoing. No other vehicles were identified at the scene. Lucy sat in the rented property and she read the report 3 times and she understood what she was reading. Not an accident. Not an investigation that would find anything useful. George had been removed. He had been removed because someone understood that what he had found could not be allowed to reach Lucy or any legal authority. She sat for a very long time without moving. She thought about George. 9 years. Every piece of advice correctly calibrated. Every document prepared with care. The man who had said "tell me what you need" and meant it without calculation. She thought about the meeting he had not arrived at. She thought about Charlotte's architecture. 18 months of deliberate construction. Patient and precise and operating alongside 16 years of friendship with a specific horror of something that has been present the whole time without being visible. She stood up. She walked to the window. She looked at the garden. She had come here to understand who these people were. She had the answer now. She had it completely. Something that had been waiting in her since the hospital room, since the kitchen hallway, since watching Rose's face crumple in the staff room, since the black bags full of her clothes at the service entrance, settled into its final shape. She picked up her phone. She called the contact she had been preparing for 3 weeks. "I'm ready," she said. "All of it. Move everything into position." She hung up. She looked at her reflection in the dark window glass. She barely recognized the woman looking back, and she thought that was probably appropriate. The woman who had walked into the doctor's office and received a diagnosis had been someone who equated love with provision and had been providing without examining the receiving. That woman was gone. What stood at the window now was something considerably more clear-eyed. Charlotte moved fast once she believed the coast was clear. Lucy watched it through the cameras with the detached precision of a woman building a case rather than processing a grief. She watched Charlotte arrive at the house in the 2nd week with 2 assistants and a specific energy. The energy of someone executing a plan they have been holding for a long time. She watched Charlotte move through Lucy's study. The files. The books. The personal items that had lived on the desk for years. Small things, a photograph, a ceramic piece Ivy had made in school, a letter from Rose with the unsteady handwriting of a 6-year-old learning to form words. Charlotte's assistant put these in a box. Not because they had value. Lucy could see this from the handling. Because removing them was part of the exercise. The systematic clearing of evidence that a specific person had occupied a specific space. She watched Charlotte sit in Lucy's chair. She watched her open Lucy's desk. She watched her on a call with someone Lucy's security team, now working entirely for Lucy through a separate channel George had established before his death, identified as a board member at Kellen Partners, Alexander Holdings' primary competitor. The conversation lasted 22 minutes. Lucy did not need to hear it. The body language was sufficient. Charlotte was offering something. The board member was receiving it. The arrangement was being formalized in the kind of conversation that never appears in writing. Amelia, meanwhile, had begun selling things. Lucy's jewelry. Pieces she had accumulated over 14 years, some given by her daughters, some purchased herself at specific moments she could remember precisely. A ring she had bought the day the company crossed $1 billion in valuation. A bracelet Ivy had chosen for her birthday 2 years ago with a serious concentration of a 7-year-old making an important decision. She watched these things being assessed by a buyer Amelia had brought to the house. She watched the buyer place them in a case. She watched Amelia count the money. She thought about Sunday phone calls. 12 years of Sunday phone calls. She thought about what it meant to have confused consistency with loyalty and proximity with care. She thought about Ivy and Rose in the staff rooms. She had spoken to them. Not directly. Through a trusted member of the household staff named Priya, who had been with the family for 8 years and who, when Lucy had reached out through a secure channel, had responded with the simple directness of someone who had been waiting to be asked. "I knew something was wrong. I've been watching. Tell me what you need." Priya told her the girls were managing. Ivy had found a way to occupy herself with books, and with looking after Rose with the focused competence of a child who has understood that the adults around her are not reliable, and has made adjustments accordingly. Rose was quieter than usual. She asked about her mother every day. What does Priya say? Lucy asked through the secure channel. Priya says, came the reply that you are somewhere thinking about them. Rose likes this. She holds the rabbit and says she knows. Lucy read this message 3 times. Then she went back to the preparation. She had 3 weeks of watching. She had everything she needed. The financial evidence George had compiled was in secure hands. The access log documentation was complete. The camera footage from the house covered 18 days of systematic erasure. She had one more thing to prepare. She called the event coordinator. The gala, she said. I understand Charlotte has organized one at the house. I need to make sure it proceeds exactly as planned. Of course, the coordinator said. Is there anything you would like added to the arrangements? Yes, Lucy said. A chair at the head of the table. Leave it empty until I arrive. Charlotte's first board meeting as acting CEO of Alexander Holdings happened on a gray weekday morning 3 weeks into Lucy's disappearance. Lucy watched through the building's internal system, which she had retained access to through a back channel her IT director, a fiercely loyal man named Demir, had maintained at her specific request. Charlotte walked into the boardroom with the specific stride of someone who has been rehearsing this moment and is now executing it. She sat at the head of the table. She opened her presentation. The lights flickered. Charlotte looked up. The presentation screen went dark. Then it came back with different content. Not Charlotte's slides. 18 months of financial records. Access logs. Time-stamped entries. Transaction records. Charlotte's name running through all of it with the regularity of a signature. The board members looked at the screen. Charlotte looked at the screen. The room's intercom activated. Lucy's voice. Clear. The voice she used in boardrooms when the information she was presenting was serious, and she needed the room to understand that she was being precise. Good morning, Lucy said. I apologize for the interruption. I thought it was important that the board have accurate information before proceeding with any decisions regarding leadership transition. The documents on the screen represent 18 months of internal sabotage conducted through credentials belonging to the individual currently seated at the head of the table. Full documentation has been provided to the relevant legal authorities. I recommend the board suspend all decisions pending review. Thank you for your time. The intercom clicked off. The room was completely silent. Charlotte's face had done several things in rapid succession that Lucy watched through the security feed with the focused attention of someone reading a document. Then Charlotte stood up and said something to the room that Lucy could not hear and walked out. Lucy watched her go. She looked at the timestamp on her monitor. 11 days until the gala. She went back to her preparation. Amelia had hired a firm to arrange the event. Lucy knew this because Priya had passed the detail through their secure channel along with the guest list and the catering specifications and the note that Amelia had specifically requested Lucy's favorite emerald gown be pressed and hung in the master suite for the occasion. Her own gown. For her sister's party. In her house. The gala was framed as a celebration of the Alexander family's resilience. This was the language on the invitations. Resilience. Lucy read this and noted it with a specific appreciation she reserved for audacity operating without self-awareness. 200 guests. The city's financial and social world. People who had known Lucy for years, who had built relationships with her across the decade of the company's growth. She watched the setup through the cameras. She watched Ivy and Rose being dressed by Priya in the staff quarters. Priya had managed this with the care she brought to everything. The girls were clean and composed. But Lucy could see in Ivy's face, even through the small camera, the specific quality of a child who has been required to be more adult than her age for too long and is managing it through sheer will. Rose held the rabbit. The gala began at 7. Lucy's car arrived at the front gates at 9:15. She had chosen the suit carefully. Not because appearance was the point. Because in a room full of people who had been told she was dead, the first impression needed to be completely unambiguous. Red. Dark. The suit of a woman who had not come to explain herself. She walked through the front gates of her own house. The security team that opened the gates for her was Priya's doing. 3 members of the household staff who had been briefed, and who stepped aside with the quiet competence of people who had been waiting for exactly this. She walked up the front steps. She pushed the doors open. The music stopped. Not all at once. One instrument, then another, then the last, the way sound ends when the source of it realizes something has changed. 200 people turned. Lucy walked through the doors of her own house in a red suit, and she looked at the room with the calm, unhurried attention of a woman arriving at a meeting she has been preparing for. She walked to the head of the table. She sat down. She looked at Amelia, who was standing near the bar in the emerald gown with a glass in her hand, and an expression that had cycled through disbelief and terror, and something that looked, underneath both of those, like the specific shame of a person caught in a situation they had constructed themselves. She looked at Charlotte, who was 3 tables back and whose face had gone the color of old paper. She looked at the room. "Good evening," she said. Her voice carried. It always had. It was one of the things she had cultivated because rooms needed to hear you. "I apologize for being late. I was detained. By my own death, among other things." The room did not laugh. It was not that kind of moment. But she heard the specific intake of breath that travels through 200 people when they understand simultaneously that they have been inside a story they did not know they were in. "I have some things to share with you," she said. "Please sit down." She played the footage first. Not the worst of it. Not yet. She played the board meeting. Charlotte's meeting. The financial records on the screen. Her own voice through the intercom. She let the room see what Charlotte had been doing to Alexander Holdings across 18 months, while standing beside Lucy as her closest friend. She played the access logs. She played the financial transfers to the Kellen Partners account. She let the room sit with this. Then she looked at Charlotte directly. "George Alston," she said. "My lawyer of 9 years. He found this evidence. He was on his way to show it to me when his car had an accident on a road he drove every week. The investigation is ongoing. I have submitted the evidence logs to the investigators, including the communication records showing that someone with access to George's calendar and route notified a third party of his travel plans on that morning." The room was very still. Charlotte looked at the table in front of her. "I am not going to tell this room that I have proof of what happened to George," Lucy said. "I am going to tell this room that the investigators have everything I have and that they will reach their own conclusions." She paused. "I wanted this room to know his name. Because he deserved to have people know his name." She breathed once. Then she stood up. She walked to the door of the main hall and she opened it. Her daughters came through. Ivy first, holding Rose's hand. Rose with the rabbit tucked under her other arm. They walked across the hall. Lucy crouched down when they reached her. She put her arms around both of them, and she held on with the specific grip of a woman who had watched her children through a camera for 3 weeks, and is now holding the reality of them with everything she has. Ivy pressed her face into Lucy's shoulder. Rose said, I told you she was thinking about us." Lucy held them for a long time in the middle of her own hall in front of 200 people, and she did not care at all about any of the 200 people. Then she looked up. 2 officers from the Financial Crimes Unit were at the door. She had called ahead. They had the documentation George had assembled, which had been held in a secure legal deposit. He had arranged for exactly this contingency, because George had been a thorough man who understood that thorough men sometimes encounter situations that require contingency planning. They walked toward Charlotte. Charlotte stood when she saw them. She said something that Lucy did not hear from across the room. Amelia by the bar set down the glass. She looked at Lucy. Lucy looked at her sister in the emerald gown in the house Lucy had built, and she felt, beneath everything else, the specific sadness of a woman who has spent years confusing availability with love, and is now sitting with the cost of that confusion in full view. She did not feel hatred. She felt the clean absence of something that had been taking up space for a very long time. "The gown," Lucy said, "was my mother's." Amelia looked down at what she was wearing. "I would like it back," Lucy said. "When you have changed." The house took 3 days to clear. Not of furniture. Of the people who had filled it with their own version of her life while she was watching from outside it. Charlotte's legal proceedings moved through the appropriate channels with the evidence George had built, comprehensive and precise even in his absence. The financial crimes investigation expanded. The Kellen partners' connection produced its own separate proceedings. Amelia left with 2 suitcases. Not the trash bags. Lucy had considered this and decided that the trash bags would have been a performance, and she was finished with performances. She let her sister leave with 2 suitcases and the specific knowledge that the emerald gown had stayed behind. She did not call Amelia. She thought she might eventually. Not to restore what had been. To acknowledge what had been real, if anything had. And to close what had not been real with the honesty it deserved. But not yet. Not while the shape of everything was still settling. Priya stayed. The household staff who had maintained the house through everything and who had, in their quiet, consistent way, protected Ivy and Rose through 3 weeks of a situation they had not been asked to navigate, all stayed. Lucy called each of them individually and thanked them with the directness she brought to things that mattered. Demir stayed. She sat in her study on the 4th day after the gala with Ivy doing homework at the corner desk, and Rose on the floor with a rabbit and a book and the specific domestic quiet of an ordinary evening in a house that had been returned to itself. She looked at the desk where Charlotte's assistant had put the ceramic piece and the letter and the photograph in a box. Priya had retrieved them from where they had been stored. They were back on the desk. The photograph. The ceramic piece Ivy had made. Rose's letter with the unsteady handwriting. Lucy looked at these things. She thought about George. She thought about him every day. She thought about the case his evidence was building and the investigators who had told her it was moving and the specific inadequacy of legal processes as a response to the loss of a person who had simply been a good man doing the right thing. She thought about what Dr. Mehta had said. She had returned to the neurologist the week after the gala. The symptoms had reduced significantly during the weeks she had been away from the house. Away from Charlotte's daily presence. Away from the supplements Charlotte had been providing with the casual attentiveness of a good friend managing a sick woman's health needs. The toxicology panel Dr. Mehta had ordered told a story that was both clinical and completely clear. The supplements had contained a compound, slow-acting, accumulating, producing exactly the kind of neurological symptoms that would present as a rare progressive condition. The symptoms had been reducing since Lucy stopped taking them. She sat in the study and looked at this information. She thought about Charlotte handing her the supplements every morning with the warm efficiency of a friend who cared about her health. She thought about 16 years. She thought about what it meant to have someone operate that close to you with that intention for that long. She filed it in the drawer alongside everything else. She looked at Ivy at the corner desk, serious over her homework, the pencil moving with a focused concentration that was entirely her own. She looked at Rose on the floor, turning a page, the rabbit beside her. She looked at her house, returned to itself. She had not faked her death to test anyone. She had done it because she needed to understand the structure of her own life before she could make decisions about how to live inside it correctly. She had done it because the diagnosis had clarified something she had been avoiding for years, that provision was not the same as connection and availability was not the same as love, and knowing the difference was not optional. She had the difference now. Clearly. At considerable cost. She looked at her daughters. She had what remained. It was, she thought, considerably more than enough to build from. She picked up her pen. She started writing. To everyone who has given everything they had to people who were counting the inventory rather than valuing the relationship. To everyone who confused being needed with being loved. What you built was real. What you gave was real. The people who did not receive it correctly are the ones who lost something. Not you. If this story reached you, please like, share, and leave a comment below. Tell us which moment stayed with you longest. Take care of yourselves. We will see you in the next story.